Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Imagine this. Britain has been invaded and settled over and over again. Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans, you name it. Each new group left their mark. But here's the big question. After all those waves of people coming in, who today still carries Britain's oldest DNA? Who has the deepest roots going back thousands and thousands of years? You might be surprised by the answer. It's not necessarily the English, and it's not the obvious ones everyone guesses. Scientists have been digging into ancient bones and comparing their DNA to ours, and the results show one part of Britain kept a much stronger connection to the really ancient past. Stick around because this story is pretty fascinating. Let's dive in. Section 1. Britain's genetic layers, a quick timeline. Let's dive in. So, to understand who carries the oldest DNA today, we first need to look at how Britain's population has changed over time. It's not one smooth story. It's more like layers of different people arriving and mixing, sometimes replacing a lot of what was there before. Let's start at the very beginning. After the last ice age, when the ice melted and Britain became an island again, the first people to move back in were hunter-gatherers. These were small groups of people living off the land, hunting animals, fishing, and gathering wild plants. We're talking around 15,000 to 10,000 years ago. One famous example is Cheddar Man. His skeleton was found in a cave in Somerset, and he lived about 10,000 years ago. He had dark skin, blue eyes, and curly hair. His DNA shows he belonged to a group called Western hunter-gatherers. These early people are the oldest human inhabitants we know of in Britain after the Ice Age. But here's the thing, even though they were first, their DNA didn't stay super strong in most people today. Only a small part, around 10% or so, of modern British DNA comes from these ancient hunter-gatherers. It got mixed in later. Next big group arrived about 6,000 years ago. These were the Neolithic farmers. They came from mainland Europe, brought farming skills, animals like cows and sheep, and they started growing crops. They also built huge stone monuments, including the early stages of Stonehenge. These farmers mixed a bit with the remaining hunter-gatherers, but they were a much bigger population. Then came the really big change, around 4,500 to 4,000 years ago. A new group arrived known as the Beaker people, named after the distinctive bell-shaped pots they made. Their arrival caused a massive shift. In many parts of Britain, especially England, studies show up to 90% of the previous population's DNA was replaced or heavily mixed with this new incoming ancestry. These Beaker folks brought ancestry from the Eurasian steppe, further east. This is the point where a lot of what we think of as ancient British DNA really starts to form. This Bronze Age mixture is the foundation for what later became the Iron Age tribes and the people the Romans called the Britons. After that, we had the Iron Age Celts. Then the Romans arrived in 43 AD. But interestingly, the Romans didn't leave a huge genetic footprint. Their soldiers and settlers came from all over the empire, but the DNA impact was pretty small overall. The next big change happened after the Romans left. Around 400-600 AD, the Anglo-Saxons arrived from what is now Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. They settled heavily in England, especially the east and south. Their language became English, and they replaced or mixed a lot with the local Britons in those areas. Then you had Vikings from Scandinavia, and finally the Normans in 1066, who were basically French-speaking Vikings. Each group added their own flavor to the mix, so when you look at a typical British person today, their DNA is like a cake with many layers. A base from the Bronze Age Beaker period, some hunter-gatherer and farmer bits, plus Anglo-Saxon, Viking, Norman, and other later additions on top. But, and this is the important part, these layers aren't spread evenly across Britain. Some regions kept more of the older layers, while others got a lot more of the newer ones. That's what makes the story interesting. I'll talk more about the science behind how we know all this in the next part, but for now, just remember, Britain's history is full of movement and change. Almost nobody today is purely from one ancient group. We're all mixed, but some of us are more mixed than others, and some places held onto the older DNA better than others. Ready to see what the latest DNA research actually says about who kept the most ancient roots? Let's keep going. Section 2. The science behind it. All right, so how do we actually know all this? It's thanks to something pretty amazing, the ancient DNA revolution. For a long time, historians had to rely on old writings, pottery, weapons, and bones to figure out what happened in the past. But bones don't always tell the full story about who people were related to. That changed when scientists figured out how to pull DNA from ancient skeletons. We're talking really old bones, sometimes thousands of years old. Labs like the one run by David Reich at Harvard have been at the forefront of this. They, along with teams in Britain and across Europe, have been testing DNA from hundreds of ancient people found in graves all over Britain and Ireland. Then they compare that ancient DNA with the DNA of living people today, using big databases like the UK Biobank, which has genetic info from hundreds of thousands of volunteers. It's like doing a giant family tree test, but on a countrywide scale and going back thousands of years. Here's what they look for. They break DNA down into different components. For example, Western hunter-gatherer DNA, early farmer DNA from the continent, and steppe ancestry from the Beaker period. By seeing how much of each ancient component a modern person has, scientists can tell how closely related they are to people from different time periods. One of the biggest surprises from these studies is how much replacement happened. In some periods, the incoming groups didn't just mix gently, they replaced large parts of the existing population. The Beaker people around 4,500 years ago are a great example. In many parts of Britain, the DNA from the earlier Neolithic farmers dropped dramatically, but it wasn't the same everywhere. That's the key point. Geography played a huge role. Places that were harder to reach, more mountainous, or further west tended to keep more of their older population. The incoming group still arrived, but they mixed rather than completely replacing the locals. Also, language gives us clues. Welsh, for example, is a descendant of the Old Brittonic language spoken before the Anglo-Saxons. English, on the other hand, comes from the Anglo-Saxon language. Places where the old language survived often preserved more of the older DNA too. Now, it's important to be clear about what this DNA research can and can't tell us. It doesn't mean anyone is pure or better than anyone else. Everyone in Britain today is a mix. We're all the result of many migrations. What the DNA shows is percentages and gradients. Who has relatively more of the ancient British ancestry and who has more recent incoming ancestry. It also focuses mostly on autosomal DNA, which is the mix from both parents. Y-DNA, which traces the father's line, and mitochondrial DNA, mother's line, sometimes tell slightly different stories, with some very old lines surviving in specific families. The bottom line from the science is this. While there have been lots of changes across Britain, the strength of that ancient DNA connection varies a lot depending on where your family comes from. And when researchers put all the data together, one region stands out for having the strongest link to Britain's deep past. Want to know which one? Let's get into that next. Section 3. Who has the oldest today? Regional breakdown. So, after looking at all these layers in the science, the big question is, who actually carries the most ancient British DNA today? The answer might surprise you. It's the Welsh. Studies show that people with deep roots in Wales have the highest amount of continuity with Britain's ancient population, especially from the Bronze Age and Iron Age. In simple terms, they kept more of that old DNA than most other parts of Britain. Wales acted like a bit of a refuge. The hilly and mountainous land made it harder for large waves of new settlers to completely take over. As a result, the mixing happened more gently, and a stronger link to the pre-Anglo-Saxon Britain survived. If you have Welsh ancestry, there's a good chance you're carrying DNA that connects you directly to the people who lived in Britain over 3,000 or even 4,000 years ago. The Old Brittonic language also survived there as Welsh, which matches the genetic story nicely. Close behind Wales is Cornwall and the southwest of England. They also show strong ancient British DNA. Like Wales, this area is further west, and it held onto more of that older ancestry compared to the east. What about Scotland? It's a bit more mixed. Parts of Scotland, especially the west and the islands, have good amounts of ancient DNA too. Some studies even found interesting Neolithic male lines surviving in places like Orkney, but overall Scotland has more layers from later groups like the Vikings. Now, England is where things change the most. In the southeast and east of England, you see much higher Anglo-Saxon and other later European ancestry. That makes sense because that's where the Anglo-Saxons first settled heavily. So while everyone in England still has a solid base of that older Bronze Age DNA, it's more diluted by the newer arrivals. To put it simply, if you line up modern people from different parts of Britain, the ones from Wales usually score the highest for ancient British ancestry. Then Cornwall, then Western and Northern areas, with Eastern England showing the most change from the old stock. Of course, this is about averages and family roots. Many English people still have lots of ancient British DNA, and plenty of Welsh people have some Anglo-Saxon or Viking mixed in. No one is 100% anything. But when scientists compare the whole picture, Wales stands out as the place with the strongest living connection to Britain's oldest DNA. Section 4. Why does this matter? And fun facts. So why should any of this actually matter to us today? At the end of the day, DNA is just biology, but it tells us something deep about who we are and where we come from. First, it helps us understand that Britain isn't just one single story. It's a place that has been shaped by waves of people for thousands of years. No group stayed completely unchanged, and almost everyone walking around Britain today is a beautiful mix of many different ancestors. That can make us a bit more humble and a lot more curious about our shared history. It also shows how geography and culture can protect things. Wales kept more of that ancient DNA, partly because of its hills and its strong sense of identity. The Welsh language survived when many other Old Brittonic languages died out in England. That connection between genes and language is really cool to see. Now for some fun facts. You might have heard of Cheddar Man, the 10,000-year-old guy from Somerset. His DNA is so well preserved that scientists found one living person in Britain today who shares a direct maternal line with him, a school teacher from the same area. That's an incredibly rare and amazing link across 10,000 years. Another fun one. Many of us still carry tiny bits of DNA from people who hunted in Britain right after the Ice Age, or who helped build Stonehenge. Even if it's only a small percentage, that DNA has been passed down quietly through all those generations. And here's something that surprises a lot of people. There is no such thing as a pure Briton. The Anglo-Saxons didn't wipe everyone out, and the ancient Britons didn't disappear. We're all carrying pieces of everyone who came before. An English person might have more Anglo-Saxon DNA, while a Welsh person has more ancient British, but both are still very much British. This research also reminds us that identity is more than just DNA. It's about the culture we grow up in, the language we speak, and the place we call home. Genetics gives us one interesting chapter of the story, but it's not the whole book. The main takeaway? Britain's oldest DNA survived best in the West, especially in Wales. But no matter where your family is from in these islands, you're part of this long, rich, mixed history. Let's wrap this up. Conclusion. After everything we've looked at, the layers of hunter-gatherers, farmers, beaker people, Anglo-Saxons, and all the rest, the clearest answer from modern DNA science is this. People with deep ancestral roots in Wales carry Britain's oldest DNA today. They have the strongest living connection to the ancient Britons who lived here thousands of years ago. Cornwall and the southwest come very close, while eastern England shows more influence from later arrivals. But remember, this isn't about one place being better. It's about understanding our island's amazing history. Britain has always been a crossroads. Every single one of us is a mix, and that mix is what makes the story so rich and interesting. Whether your family is from Cardiff, Cornwall, Glasgow, or London, you're carrying pieces of this long journey. Some carry more of the deep ancient layers, others have stronger recent influences. But we're all part of the same British story. DNA research like this keeps teaching us new things about our past. It shows us that continuity can survive through tough times, and that migration has always been part of human life. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell me, where is your family from? Did this surprise you? And what other ancient DNA topics should we cover next? See you in the next video. Take care.